Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fierce Conversations with Toby, the show where we discover the silver lining in life's most difficult stories. I'm your host, Toby Dorr. Before we start, can you tell me, Pat, what your favorite color is and why?
I don't really have a favorite color. I think that I'm inspired by things around me or things that I see. Like I have friends that are artists; they're very gifted. I'm not in that area, and I love how they play with color, and they'll put things together that I might not be drawn to, but yet it just works.
That's
One
interesting.
thing, yeah. I will say one thing. When I was doing the book, my illustrator, who was brilliant, we changed our color tones, and she asked me to look at different color palettes to go from the joy at the beginning of the book to this more solid and serious and somber end of the book. So she and her and I, we came up with color palettes and looked at what's going to best express the book. And that was an interesting education for me.
Yeah, I
as
love
we
that.
move through a color scheme.
And I'm looking at your book now, and this is actually Pat's book. Let me get it up here so you can see it well. I want to get it right. It's The Crystal Beads, Lalka's Journey. And it's a story of a girl during the Holocaust, a girl in Poland. And when I look at the beginning of the book, you have a lot of yellow, bright, sunshiny yellow. And then towards the end of the book, it gets more somber and has different the color tones. So I think that's so true. I think colors, they have so much effect on us, and they really set the stage to set the mood. So I think that's pretty powerful. I love how you did the different colors. That's pretty apparent to me now that I look at it.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing to learn, to see how to be able to capture that.
So what's the hardest decision you've ever had to make, Pat?
Boy, which one? I guess, I think they are, I think there are many, but I think some of the ones to me that hit on the artistic side, the best was my background. The original background was in the theater world in New York. I was working in theater there. I ran a children's workshop company there for underprivileged kids, and then I moved up to, I did summer stock up in Maine, and then I ended up running the company, and I ran a murder mystery dinner theater company, and did some regional work, but theater doesn't always pay the bills, so I needed to make a career shift. And that was very tough. So I wanted to choose a career that still allowed me to express myself and look at people and trying to understand people. And because in writing, you're really looking at character development. Who are these characters? Where are they coming from? So psychology, where else do you go? Right. So I made a switch. And that was really hard, because in one way I thought I was saying goodbye to something I loved. But in another way, I was able to incorporate the artistic side through psychodrama, through role plays, working with patients, working with clients.
I could see the connection there. At first, I read about your background in theater, and then I knew you were a psychologist, and you actually worked in the prison environment. And I thought,
yes,
those seem like two such different paths, but it does make sense how you can connect them. So that does make it work, I think. So you published a children's book. We just talked about it briefly, but it's Lalka's Journey, A Crystal Beads. You published your children's book in June of 2022, which is the same month and year that I published my memoir. So we're kind of publishing sisters here. I think even in the same week.
Yes, we are.
My book published on June 15th. Wow. What was your date?
14th. So we are almost twins.
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. And I remember watching you, announcing your book, and it was so exciting. And I was doing the same thing at the same time. And I thought that was pretty cool. So where did the idea for your book come from?
It happened a long time ago, actually, when I was still in the theater world. My rabbi had talked about a little girl during the Holocaust. He just gave me a paragraph, basically. That was it, and what I had heard, and it stuck with me, and it stuck with me, and it stuck with me. And at that time, being in theater, I was acting, and I was looking at theater monologues, and so I wrote it as a theater monologue initially, and then I put it aside. And had a long career. And when I came down to Florida, semi-retired, I wanted to join a writing group. And the first thing that I pulled out was that monologue to turn it into a short story. Especially in today's day and age, where we really need to be expressing love and caring about each other. Even if we're different, we can still care about each other. So I figured it was timely occasion to really publish something that really spoke to people and could resonate about.
Yeah, I love that. And your book is a children's book, and it's not a fairy tale story. It's a real story. No. It's a difficult story. And that's one of the things I love about it, of course, because, I'm into talking about fierce things, difficult things. And so many children's books are mermaids and, princesses and fairy tales. And your book is not. It really brings reality into the world. And I love that about it. I think that's one of its strengths. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the theme of the story?
Yeah, the theme of the story is we were in Poland in 1939 is where it's set. And a mother has to make a very difficult choice to keep a little girl alive. And she teaches her, she and a neighbor teaches her Catholic songs and prayers to stay safe. And she did it because she's only 7 years old. She played it as a game. I'm going to teach you this game to play and to keep you safe. And the mother then takes her to a convent, and several children at that time did go into convents to remain safe during the Holocaust years. And the child then goes through, and I won't give it away, but the child then goes through having to look at, how can I stay safe? What did Mama teach me when she's confronted by evil? And has to figure out how to stay safe through that. And there's a nun that protects her through that time as well.
Yeah, I think
the whole idea.
I think it's really powerful, and it's beautifully illustrated too. So, and especially I love this page. You've got the Star of David
necklace. That's the theme of the book,
and the rosary.
That's the theme
right
of the book.
There. Yeah, and I just think it's beautiful. So I love your book. My only regret is I don't have you sign it, because I have never met you in person. So we'll have to make that happen one of these days. So you've been traveling quite a bit to promote your book. I think, did you even leave the United States to talk about your book?
I did, but I didn't talk about it overseas. I did have a trip because my husband's from Ireland, so we went there, and I did bring that over there. But mostly everything that I did was in this country at various different organizations that I had the privilege of working for, both that and Zoom. One section of the book that I didn't want to just make it the story. It's important to me to make a curriculum guide out of this book. So I put questions for kids, questions for adults. And I put a section on a place in Tennessee called, that's the Whitwell Middle School.
Yes. Where they did the boxcar thing with paperclips.
The Paperclip project.
Yes.
They collect paperclips to honor each person that perished during that time.
Because when you say the number, it's a number.
The number is number.
And you can't understand how big it is. But I think the teacher was brilliant, because she wanted to show her kids how big that number was. And so they started collecting paper clips. And that's a lot of paper clips. I mean, that's really impactful to see how big that is. I just think that's a powerful project. Yeah, I saw that you went there, and I had been reading about that project previously, and I was really intrigued. I'm going to have to put that on my list to go visit.
Yeah.
'Cause
And that's in middle school, and they do
Mhm.
it has really become, it's been in 20 years right now, and the books are stored in a German car, rail car that was used to bring, Jews to
Oh,
concentration
yes,
camps.
that's right. They
They
got a railroad car donated to them, didn't they,
Yes.
somehow? And yeah, I think that's pretty
Yes.
powerful. Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
the cli and the and it that is stored on the site, so when I travel, I did a presentation back for them when the book was written, because I
Mhm.
really wanted to include that, because to me, that meant hope, that meant what we can do. This is a story that took place in the past, yet
Yes.
what we deal right now, with anti-Semitism and hatred is
Mhm.
right now. So there was an example in here. Here's what kids can do. Here's how kids can
Yeah.
help, and that has become, internationally known. Survivors,
Mhm.
Holocaust survivors and families go there,
Mhm.
to visit. It has an extensive library, and artifacts from survivors and
Mhm.
family members of survivors, and so that to me was extremely important.
I think that's
For me.
beautiful. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna put that on my list, and, I live here outside of Washington, DC, and I noticed that the Smithsonian has a Holocaust museum, which I haven't been to yet, but it's on my list for one of our day trips into the city, so, yeah, I think definitely we need to learn from the past, especially the
Hmm.
tragedies and the horrors of the past, so we don't repeat them.
Yes.
I think that's really interesting. So, you've also taken your story about lalka, which, by the way, I learned that lalka is the Polish word for doll. And you wanted to give this girl, you didn't want to give her a name because you didn't want her to be
Mhm.
specific to a particular child. So you used a nickname. So lalka in Polish means doll. And you've taken Locke's story to other artistic interpretations. So tell us about some of those. I think there's some ballet and a couple other things.
Yeah, it really evolved. I belong to an organization, called the National League of American Pen Women, and it's writers, artists, dancers, musicians. They're based out of Washington D.C., but there's a branch in every state. And before my book became a book, it was a short story, and I collaborated with a collage artist who did a collage piece of the book, her interpretation of that. So, um, it started with that. Then from there, after the book was published, I connected with a composer and musician who then also had music that she adapted for the book. Um, and I connected them with another National League of American Pen Women, long title, um, uh, a dancer, and
Wow.
she danced one of the pieces from the book. And right now, we're going to be heading to a state conference in October where all of us are going to get together, and we're going to put this as a staged production, dramatic reading, have the collage, have the music. And the dancer's sister also composed a specific piece of music based on that last picture that you held up with the rosary in
Oh,
one hand and the
yes.
Star of
Uh
David in
huh.
the other, is specifically for that. So we will be putting this into a performance piece that we'll be presenting in
How
October.
beautiful. How
Yeah.
beautiful. I'm hoping you're going to be able to record it, publish it somehow so we can all
We're going to
watch.
try to see what we can do. We hope
Yeah.
so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think that's beautiful. Where's that going to be, by the way?
It is going to be in Daytona. It's
Daytona.
the National League of American Pen Women, the Florida branch is
Hmm.
having its state conference in Daytona Beach, in late October.
That's beautiful.
So that's going to
I
be,
love that
yeah,
story.
it's
I can't
exciting.
wait. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. So you also have a history as a prison psychologist. Tell us what you learned from that job.
Yeah, I was a prison psychologist. I was also worked in a forensic hospital, so I got
Mhm.
to see people there, both there and as well as a prison. And I think one of the things that struck me probably the most about that is that, one of my jobs, I had a staff and everything, and we do educational programs for the inmates and everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
But one of the things that hit me, I think, the hardest was that when you want to educate and move someone into a different life who knew no good life when you were
Mhm.
young, how do you say, here's a good alternative? for you
Yes.
because it doesn't connect in any way. There's no root, there's no source. So what are we not doing when we have what are we not mentoring? What are we not doing enough of in our society that allows people before they get to a prison to see that I can go out there and do something? Because especially the young men, there's nothing they seem to connect to. No one to say, I've got this, because it's falling back into my world. Is this prison? And well, I kind of like it because I can be a kind of hot shot with my game.
I know how
here,
this works, and the outside
Right?
world is unknown to me, and so that makes
Yeah.
it scary. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yes.
Of course, I
Yeah.
can relate, since
You
I
can
served
relate.
time in
Yeah.
prison, and so I was on the other side of it. And, in my book, I tell one story because when you go to a jail, now jails are different than prison. Jails are a
Yeah.
place where they just hold you while they're charging you and deciding if you're going to be sentenced or released. But when you go into a jail, you cannot bring any medications with you. And I had a
Yes.
roommate in jail who had some serious, serious psychiatric problems and had been on a lot of heavy medication. And she cut her arm and she heard voices that told her to hurt people. And when she got to the jail, they took away her pills, her medication. They didn't give it to her. Now, when you go to the jail, you're evaluated by a doctor there or a nurse, and they decide what prescriptions you can have. But in jails, there really aren't psychiatrists on duty. You'll have them in prisons. So they don't prescribe psychiatric medications. And, I was really fortunate because I was on thyroid medication because I had my thyroid removed after thyroid cancer. And my parents knew enough to go to the judge and get a court order that I could have my thyroid medications without having to be evaluated by the doctor. But my roommate, her parents, they didn't understand the court system, and they had their own issues. And so, Jennifer just, I think I called her Jessica in the book. I'll call her Jessica, but Jessica just, she just degraded over time because, when she told me these voices are getting louder and louder and louder, and I'm not going to be able to stop it, and I'm going to hurt somebody, and I need my medication. Every day she'd ask for her medication. Every day they'd tell her that she didn't have any. And that just so stuck with me because jail is hard enough, let alone trying to get through when you need a psychologist or a psychiatrist or some kind of medication. And the role of a prison psychologist is so critical because if you don't have a problem before you go to prison, you're going to have one while you're there. So really, every single inmate has need of a psychologist. And did you find that just overwhelming, the workload? Because I would think that there's people that you need to spend more time with, but there's so many people you need to see and work with that. Did it feel difficult for you to have to cut your time with each person?
It is very, very overwhelming, and scheduling a lot of time is cut because if there's an event going on in a unit and you can't see the person because there could be a lockdown or an incident that just happened, and you've got so many people on your schedule that it was impossible to catch up with everyone that you needed to see. And I had a staff, and between all of them, we were a lot of times here on lockdown. Something's going on. You can't get somewhere. There were not enough guards to go to take you to go with you because nobody went alone. You're always
You always have to have an officer.
Yeah. So you're dealing with that, and then you're not dealing with enough time. Difficult conditions and situations, and an outlandish amount of paperwork that had to be filled out with someone. So the staff was stuck between: do I see the person? Or do I get this outrageous stack of paperwork on this one visit in there? And that became a big problem. And felt like that was never addressed enough because there was stuff that had to be done and written and out in time and logged in all these different complex situations. And if you don't have that, the staff would be in trouble. And at the same time, it's like, but how do we see the patient? So we're always battling that politics of, it's not,
Well, yeah, I would think it would be so difficult and so overwhelming. And I think, when you go home at the end of the day, you really have to go through a process to remove yourself from that environment and those worries and those inmates and those pressures. Because if you are a good psychologists, you really do want your patients to get better and to make progress. And it's got to weigh heavy on your mind when your hands are tied in a lot of cases. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that would be a difficult job. So what did you find rewarding about it? I know it had to have a rewarding side as well.
I think number one, we had a good staff. I think that was
Mhm.
exceptional, because they really did care, and they worked hard. And there were some people that I felt I reached, whether anything,
Mhm.
and whether when it's sick, when it was on the outside, is there a chance? Am I making any difference?
Mhm.
Because of the recidivism rate is so high.
Yes.
Is anything clicking?
Mhm.
Am I getting through to them? And it was those times when I felt like I did,
Mhm.
and we dug up some things enough for them to look at and have a willingness, hopefully, for them to continue
Mhm.
on that path once they got out. That was about as far as we could get at times, was
Mhm.
the rewards on the
I
other end
I
of
think that's
when they got out.
powerful. And, it is so difficult when you get out of prison. I only served 27 months, which was a long time for me.
That's not
But
enough.
it was not a long time compared to a lot of the people I was in prison with. They had much longer sentences to deal with. And when I got out of prison, you know, I think it probably took me 5 months to adjust to being out of prison because I I had panic attacks if I was in a crowd or it was dark and I couldn't see who was behind me, or being afraid to make a decision because what if I didn't stop long enough at the stop sign and I turned right and the police pulled me over and I'm on probation and now I have to go back to prison. It was just this fear, this uh, uh, completely overwhelmed situation because
Mhm.
you had no decisions to make and no control over anything. And now you're out and you're just like, you've got to create some boundaries for yourself and some structure so that you can feel safe inside that space. And it was a huge
Mhm.
adjustment. It was a huge adjustment. And I had a really good relationship with a prison psychiatrist in one of the places I was in. And I really think she saved my life. So it was really important. And I think there should be more focus on psychologists and psychiatrists in correctional facilities because it's difficult. It's really difficult.
Yeah.
So I love that. I'm so grateful to know someone who's made that their career. Um, Tell us about a significant event in your life that knocked you down and how did you pick yourself up?
Um, what comes to mind is I'm working on a novel right now, and it's semi-autobiographical, I guess you want to say,
Mhm. Mhm.
with a co-writer, Steve Hardiman, and it really covers the life of a family in New Jersey during the during the Vietnam War era and everything.
Mhm.
And my pa- my there are several adults in it, but it's parents and a grandmother, and who are no longer here. So as I'm writing these characters, and I kept them pretty similar, it's
Mhm.
fictional,
Mhm.
but I kept them similar. And I think that when I talk about the idea of what knocked me down, the losing them and the loss
Yes.
of each one of them,
Mhm.
and I'm bringing them back to life in this, in this novel, but it is so painful because they're not
Yes.
here, and it's like, and I'm honoring them through this,
Mhm.
and the words. There's some things that are real, and
Uh-huh.
accurate. And what they lived through, and I just want to say, why didn't I? Why we just get older, we grow, and we don't
Yeah.
take in the information. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I never asked about this.
Yeah.
This happened in your life, and I didn't get that chance. So
Uh-huh.
So every time I find the thing that I couldn't ask, it's like I'm lost, and a reminder of,
Yes.
oh my God, oh my
I
God.
can
And
so
you live,
relate.
yeah, how did you survive this? I want to know that, and
Mhm.
we don't, I think our younger generation, maybe some are in tune to that, but I'm not sure everybody is, because we think our family's going to live forever. And then
Yes.
they don't.
Yes. My
Wherever they go.
grandmother's father died in World War One, and he died when she was 8 years old, and she was very much a daddy's girl. And he was buried in France. He was on a ship that was torpedoed and his ship sunk, and he managed to swim and stay on and find a rock to cling to. And they got him off the rock but he died of hypothermia. And so he was buried in France, I think, or somewhere. And then after the war, they brought his body back to South Dakota where his family lived and my grandmother lived. And her mother opened the casket and had her children look at him. I mean, he'd been dead for several years. And I knew that, but I never asked her, what was that like? We never talked about that. And I would love to know what impact that had on her for the rest of her life. And she kept a comb, a little metal comb that was in his pocket in that casket. And she got that comb and she kept it and she still had it when she died. And now my brother has it. But there's so many stories that you wish you could ask. And now you'll never have the answers because they're gone. Yeah.
They're gone.
Mhm.
So when I put the pieces together, as my way of sort of honoring what lives they had, I can only go by and try to fill in some gaps. But there's so many, especially when you're writing, because there's so many questions you have all of a sudden.
Yes. Uh-huh.
It's like, well, what happened in World War II? What about this? What happened over there?
Mhm.
My grandmother came over from Czechoslovakia on the Carpathia, which was the same ship that rescued the Titanic. This was before that time.
Uh-huh.
But a 16-year-old on her own, living in New York, scrubbing floors in offices.
Wow.
And that's all I knew. I knew that. I had a fair.
Yeah. But there's so
right.
much story around that, and
Yes.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
maybe you'll find some kind of closure in creating a novel out of it because you'll write scenes around it to fill in the blanks. So I think I love that. And I love historical fiction, especially when it's based on something true. So I can't wait for your novel to come out. That's going to be exciting. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to work on next. And I've got so many ideas, but it's hard to pick one.
Yeah, one will hit at some point and just it'll let you know. Right? And when I found out
that's right. It just comes to the surface and says, I'm here. It's my time. Yeah.
Yeah. I had no idea I was going to do the crystal beads.
Mhm.
I was on the novel and I do not know what, seriously, I was working on the novel.
Mhm.
And then the crystal beads just decided to pop in.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, hello. So it's okay though, because I think they're both valuable and, things to be working on and lessons to learn,
Yes, I love that. Now, I wanted to ask you, your illustrator, tell us a little bit about your illustrator for this book.
Oh my God, Katja Royce. I wanted to have someone who had a connection to the Holocaust in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to find someone. Thank goodness for Instagram, where you can find a bunch of different illustrators.
Yes.
I found Katja, who was from Russia and had moved to Israel a few years before. She didn't speak English. So we worked everything through translation apps.
Wow.
When I first talked to Katja and told her about this, she said, oh my God. She says, you don't know what this means to me. My grandfather came from Ukraine as a little boy with a large family, and they left Ukraine just before the Nazis destroyed their village and they moved to Siberia. So this was a labor of love to do this project. But I found his story so fascinating that I said, you know what? We're going to put this in the afterword of the book so that kids and adults reading, because the book is for kids, but it's for kids of all ages. It's for adults too, because it does both. I wanted people to have a connection to a survivor while we still have one. So F.M. Royce tells a story.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. And her illustrations are just dynamic, and you can feel they're from the heart and the soul.
Yes.
You can feel her personal connection.
Mm-hmm. And I love how the illustrations, they fill the whole book. The text is a lot of times it's over the illustrations, and I
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
It's not just a small little picture. So
Yeah, we really wanted to design it to give a full
Mhm.
feel that you can take that environment, that room, that
Mhm.
scene, that outdoor scene, whatever, and she was able to open that up and create that whole world.
I
It
love
was
that.
first.
So who has been your most important mentor?
I'll go back there that you can pick so many people,
Mhm.
but I'll just go back to the fact of the book I'm writing right now. The words of wisdom imparted from my grandmother as a
Mhm.
kid. You
Mhm.
know, the things that their ability to survive during really, really rough times.
Mhm.
I think about that every time I say, oh, things are rough right now. Single mom of 7, 8 kids, husband died. She had to go to work in scrub offices in New York. She lived in
Wow.
Jersey and went back and forth. And you think
Mhm.
about that. You can have famous people as mentors. A lot of people think of there's somebody
Yeah.
out there, this
Uh-huh.
famous.
Mhm.
What about these people who are right there that we live
Mhm.
with, that have raised us? You
Yes.
know,
Yes,
um,
yes.
they serve a mentorship.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, when I was, thinking about this question, my grandmother is one of my strongest mentors, and, she raised my dad by herself. She was a single mom, and my dad had an older brother who died as a baby. He never came home from the hospital, and I never knew why. I never knew what was wrong with him, except I do know that they were both born during the Depression, and I remember my grandma telling me she used to go out in the backyard and eat grass because she was so hungry. So I wish I knew the story, but
right?
I was the oldest of 7 kids. And so I never felt in my life and my family that I was an individual person. I was always this group of the Phelan kids, but my
Yeah.
grandma made each one of us feel special. And so during the summer, she would take each of us for 2 or 3 weeks and we would stay with her, just us. And we got to pick out at the grocery store what we wanted to eat. We got to pick what we wanted to watch on TV and we got to pick what games we played with her in the evenings. And she just made me feel like I was important and I was significant in her life. And she made
Mhm.
me want to be an awesome grandma. And so,
Oh,
I wanted to be my grandma. And so, she's one of my strongest mentors. And I don't know, maybe her story's one that I should write. I like what you're doing. So I'm going to add
yeah.
that to my list. So, yeah,
Mhm.
pretty interesting. I think grandparents are
Yeah.
really important. So
Yeah.
tell us about how a turning point in your life propelled you in a new direction.
Um, I think that when I chose to um retire, well, semi-retire, because I still do a private practice right now. I work my other special I got a couple of specializations, but my other specialization is Vietnam, working with Vietnam vets.
Mhm.
So I still do some private work with them, and I do other work. I also work with the LGBTQ community.
Mhm.
But when I went from full-time psychologist, when I left prison, I was also at the Veterans Administration before that. So career was
Mhm.
sort of split between the two. Um, the artistic side that in some ways I kept, but in many ways I buried because you just don't have time when you're
Right.
doing
Yeah.
everything else under the
Mhm.
sun. Immediately, the writing came back to me. Immediately,
Mhm.
I started writing again. And so the turntables went from, theater initially,
Mhm.
psychology.
Mhm.
Okay. Even though I wrote during psychology and you had to read psychological stuff and
Right.
dissertations and all that stuff. Ooh,
It
tough
wasn't
stuff.
creative.
But
It was
yeah, but it wasn't the
technical.
creative stuff.
Right.
So as soon as and I mean like the day after I
Mhm.
found myself and I was in a writing.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the turning point propelled me to work on Lalka and work
Mhm.
on the current novel, and that whole world, the artistic world. I mean, and I didn't even realize I was going to be doing that. And I mean,
Mhm.
wrapped into it completely with numbers of writing groups,
Yeah, I love that.
working with a co-author and, it,
Mhm.
it was just, and it's like, oh, I'm me again,
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
here I am. I
here I
love
am.
that.
Nice
Yes,
to know me after
yes.
all these.
Yeah, it's nice to find yourself. I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what's one word that inspires you?
the word that comes to mind is like, I'm just going to say endurance,
Yes,
you
that's a
know?
powerful one.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and when I think of that, it's like, um, it's plowing through
Mhm.
no matter what you're dealing with, what you're going through. So I think some people, and I'll counsel people often that, things happen in life and they do, and they get us stuck and we
Yeah.
don't move and we
Uh-huh.
can stay stuck. And the point
Mhm.
is, you can do it. You have more strength than you think you do. You
Mhm.
can go through these tough situations as hard as, I mean, look at you. If you'll
Yes.
talk about that, come on,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
I- endurance, right? And you
Mhm.
move through that adversity, you move through those struggles and you can keep going.
Yes.
Don't give up. You can keep going. And it's
Mhm.
going to take, it could take time,
Mhm.
but that's what propels me forward.
I love that. That's a really
You
powerful
know,
word. I think that's excellent. So what was one time you really felt imprisoned and what did you do to liberate yourself?
um, boy, probably going through a very difficult marriage, years
Mhm.
ago.
Mhm. I
And
can
fortunately,
relate
my
to
brother
that.
was, and
Mhm.
sadly, a husband who put the child as a pawn in
Mhm.
between that. I was doing my doctorate while also raising my son and going
Mhm.
through a divorce. Thank goodness my parents were there for me.
Mhm.
And there were times when my parents just said to me, just quit school, quit
Oh,
school.
yeah.
And because you really need to, focus on your son, focus on what you have to
Mhm.
do right now.
Mhm.
They never believed in women in education. And anyway, it was
Mhm.
just we're blue collar family. I mean, I never
Yes.
went to college for years. I was told you'd be a secretary. That's what you do.
Mhm. Yeah.
You work in an office. They were blue
Mhm.
collar. They were factory workers. So
Mhm.
secretary was the step up. So I started college late. But during that time, they were like, we're worried. It's a tough time. You're dealing with a son, not a husband who's exactly helpful and really tough on my little guy.
Mhm.
Um, and I just said, I think I'm going to do better all around. I had a master's by that point. I already had a
Mhm.
master's in counseling. I didn't have the doctorate. But I chose to, as hard as it was during that time, I chose to, stick with it. The
Mhm.
endurance. I chose to stick
Yes.
through the hard times with the support of my parents, and a young son, and moved through it enough so that we could
Mhm.
have a good life and got the divorce.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I love endurance. That's a great word. And I do think
Mhm.
that, you know, we look at the difficult things in our lives and we kind of might question why. Why do I have to go through this? But I think it's more important to think, thank you for this opportunity to grow because you really do grow and become stronger in going through those difficult times. So
You really
I,
do.
I
You really
look
do.
at them as blessings, actually.
Yeah.
So, although they're difficult, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, so what's one question you wish I'd ask? Is there something else you'd like to share with us?
I can't think of anything that comes to mind. Um, Nothing really comes to mind. Nothing
Okay.
really comes to mind. I have to just say, yeah, nothing really hits there.
And we will put links to reach you and to purchase copies of your book in the show notes so people will be able to find you. Is there a question you'd like to ask me before we
Well,
end?
there is one question that I would like to say. Have you asked? I just
Okay.
realized that novel we're hoping to publish. Steve Hardeman and I are planning to publish next on the 24. The title is All the Broken Angels, and
All
it's
the
about
broken angels.
all the broken angels, and it's
I
about
love
people.
that.
We're all a little bit broken, you
Uh-huh.
know, and those wings sometimes can kind of fall off, but it doesn't mean we can still work and fly,
Mhm.
and keep going,
Yeah, I
and the
love
people
that.
have that endurance.
I love that title. Do you have a website, Pat?
Yes, yes. It's patblackgould.com.
Okay, and we'll
Yeah,
include that in the show notes as well, but I'm
yes,
sure we'll be
yes.
able to see updates
Hmm.
about your book and if
Yeah,
people want to follow you on social media, they'll be able to keep track of when the book's going to be
yes.
out. But I think that's awesome. I'm looking forward to it. So is there a question you'd like to ask me?
Well, my question for you, I guess, was I was so impressed with your book and your background because we had met at Women
Yes, we
in
did.
Publishing, right? And I immediately connected, and I thought, my gosh, I didn't know women in prison. All I traded was was
Yes.
mostly men, and that what it's like to survive
Mhm.
tough times. What is something that you think about for you during those difficult times that led you move through that time in prison and survive
You
that?
know,
And it's what you're doing now.
yeah, there were really two things that were my superpowers in moving through that. The first one was my mom. My mom was so steadfast and unconditional in her love. She was there for me every week, and I could lean on her. And that is important. A lot of people in prison don't have a person like that supporting them on the outside. And so, first I have to say my mom. And second, I have to say God helped me through it because I really did feel like I had a belief in God my whole life, but I never had a connection to God. And in prison, I found that connection and I found strength from that. And I actually, felt a connection where I could hear him telling me that my story was going to change women's lives. And when I got out of prison, I needed to tell it. And so that gave me a purpose. And I thought, okay, there's a reason for this, and I'm going to use it to do something good. So really those two things are what got me through. So, yeah.
And needed, and it helps so much because you're right. So many people don't have someone there. So you have
Yes,
something
it's
that's
so important, and I tell people,
Yeah.
if you have a family member who's in prison, send them a card. You do not know what a piece of mail means to someone in prison. And that it costs you one stamp. It's not expensive. Accepting phone calls from prison, that is expensive. So, if you can't do that, just send a card because it means a difference to someone.
Yeah.
It's so important.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, Pat, thank you so much. I've loved this interview and I can't wait to read your novel. So you can put me down as a beta reader if you'd like, because I would really love to read it and give you some
and mine
feedback.
for your next project.
Okay. I'll definitely do that. Do that. All right. Thanks so much, Pat.
Thank you, Toby.
Thank you for joining me on Fierce Conversations with Toby. Your support and listening means so much to me, and I hope today's conversation makes a difference in your world. If you would like to support this podcast, there are many ways to do so. I found these ways tend to help the most in getting our message out into the world. Number 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to or watch this podcast. If you can leave a 5-star rating or a like on this episode on YouTube, that helps even more. And if you leave a comment or a review, that helps the most. The next way you can support Fierce Conversations with Toby is to join our Patreon at patreon.com/Fierce Conversations. All tiers come with a downloadable digital gratitude journal created by me and membership in a private Facebook group that I also lead. Most importantly, 10% of all proceeds from your subscription will go directly to donating my workbooks to women in prison. Finally, sharing the link to this show with your friends, family, and anyone who wants to listen is appreciated more than I can say. Thank you again for joining me today and supporting this show by listening to it and sharing it with friends. Fierce Conversations is created and hosted by me, Toby Dorr. Produced by Number 3 Productions. The theme song that you're hearing now, Groovin', was composed and arranged by Lisa Plass. Lisa also plays the flute for the theme with Carolyn Parody on piano and Tony Ventura on bass. Find out more at tobydor.com. This is Fierce Conversations with Toby. Escape your prison.